Number 1. When I was in high school, I lived in a pretty bad neighborhood for a while. There were a few crappy houses, and the area was known for drug use. People lived there because the rent was cheap. We were renting a vacant lot between two sad, dumpy houses, and my sister and I lived in an RV, mostly by ourselves. My mom was in a relationship with an abusive guy who kept her at his house all the time, so we were left by ourselves for days. It wasn't much of an issue since we were old enough to take care of ourselves, being high school age and all. Anyways, our lot had a road running in front and back of it, but the entrance was blocked from one road with a log. That was the road I would go jogging on. I would jog from that blocked driveway to the stop sign at the very end. If I made this round trip 10 times, it equaled to about 3 miles, so I would be out there every day after school just burning off energy. I started to notice a middle-aged man that would come out to the road sometimes and try to stop me to talk. I always thought that was weird, being that I was obviously busy and had my headphones in. Sometimes, he would just sit on his back porch and smoke and watch me run. Sometimes he would go out to the road and try to stop me. Knowing the probability that he was probably just an old, methed out crook, I did what I could to avoid him. This continued a few days a week for about 2 weeks, and usually, after I had passed him 2 or 3 times, he would give up trying to get my attention and go back inside his house. But one day, he must have caught me at the end of my run, and so had the opportunity to see where I crossed the log and ran into the lot. That's the only explanation I could have had for what happened. It was about 12:30 or 1 in the morning, and I was still up watching anime on Netflix when I heard a knock on the RV door. Thinking it was my mom, who had potentially come home from her boyfriend's house for the night, I went to open the door, but something stopped me. I have no clue what made me stop, but I decided it would be better to call her instead, to see if it was her at the door. As I was calling her, there was the knocking again, but not on the door, but on the windows, the walls, everywhere. It was finally loud enough to wake my sister up, who was asleep in the back where the bed was, and I quickly told her to be quiet. My mom answered, and all I whispered into the phone was, "Get over here. Someone's knocking all over the RV." And she hung up the phone and drove over with her boyfriend. I was completely terrified because RVs aren't exactly known for their security, and the lock could have easily been broken. But we just acted like we weren't home for the entire time this person was banging on our RV. When she got there, no one was on the lot, although she was only a few minutes away. There was no knocking after that, and no man. All I can guess was that this guy got spooked enough to not watch me anymore. And that is 100% okay with me. Number 2.
It's amazing how things can haunt us and past experiences make us distrust other people. I've been carrying this around, but I've never told anyone the whole story. This all started back in 2004. I can't believe it's been 11 years now. I was 14 back then. I was a pretty good kid. I was very polite, I did very well in school, and I was always home by 6 to eat dinner. I never stayed out late or did anything wrong, such as drugs or alcohol or anything of the sort. I used to be fairly thin but strong. People had always compared me to other girls, and I was never quite as feminine as them. I didn't mind much. In my opinion, climbing trees was far superior to wearing pretty dresses and makeup. I was proud to be masculine and strong, but it didn't exactly make me popular as a result. Finding new friends was always hard. So I started taking up some hobbies, and among those was martial arts. It fit well with me, and we were a small team of 7 to 8 people who got along pretty well. One of these guys, Matt, was a pretty shy and quiet boy. We were all around the age of 14, and I was pretty direct, and I thought that it simply intimidated him a bit. So I tried to make him feel more included with the others. And I spoke, since I had previously known what it felt like to be an outsider in social groups, and we were all a really friendly bunch. We rode our bikes to and from practice, and I noticed we always went quite a bit of the same way down the road. So we naturally started to talk while riding our bikes home. It was fine. He seemed friendly, albeit a little weird. But I was weird too, so who was I to judge? Everything went just like business as usual for the whole first year. We all became friends and I cherished it, as I didn't really have many others. But the year after was my last year at our regular schools, and wanted to do well, and frankly, I had too much on my plate. So I started to skip practice from time to time to do homework. This didn't go over well with Matt, and he started texting me asking me where I was. Weird thing was that I hadn't given him my number, but I didn't know anyone else with that name. I didn't respond a lot since my dad paid for my phone, and he would get angry if I spent too much on anything. So one day I stopped responding at all. This must have prompted him to begin calling me. I didn't like that and didn't pick up at all for a while. I still sometimes came to practice, but this was kind of freaky and I didn't really like where it was going. Whenever he saw me there, he just kind of stood and stared at me, and had reverted back to always being the quiet kid in the background. I stopped trying to get him fitted into our conversations at this point. Since he started scaring me, I began going home an alternate route, since I couldn't deal with being stuck by his side for 10 minutes on my bike. While this went on, he kept calling me, and I never picked up. One day I had it with the constant calls and I picked up. "Hello?" I asked pretty harshly. He probably hadn't expected me to pick up at all. His breathing was somewhat heavy and it gave me chills. "Hey," he said, Are you coming to practice on Wednesday?" He sounded weirder than normal, and I regretted my decision to pick up the phone. "Yeah, of course." And I was met with complete silence for a while. "Good, I'll see you there." I could hear the smile in his voice, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Wednesday came, and I was in my way over my head and decided against going to practice. I hoped he wouldn't call again, and he didn't. My phone was silent for several weeks. When I felt comfortable, I went back to practice, but he wasn't there. I thought that maybe he had finally gotten the hint and decided to leave me alone. But my curiosity got the best of me, and I asked the only other girl about it. What she told me next was so surreal and chilling. "Oh, Matt? Yeah, it happened a few weeks ago, I think. You weren't here and he barged in the middle of practice and yelled out your name. 'Look at what you've done to me,' he yelled and showed off his arms. They were cut and torn and blood was dripping everywhere. I was shocked, but also very glad I had decided against going on that day. She then told me how our teacher had called for an ambulance and tried to calm Matt down. He had apparently gone ballistic when he realized I wasn't even there. He had then been committed to the psych ward, and as far as I gathered, his phone and other belongings were not available to him until he had undergone complete psychiatric evaluation. I felt so relieved. Now, surely I would be safe. Only I wasn't. The psych ward was in my city, and at one point they must have let him have his phone back, because he began calling me, and this time he left voice messages. He said things like, "You're a horrible person. You ruined me, and no one will ever love you like I could have." I was mostly confused. We had never been romantic in any way whatsoever, and I had never expressed interest in him. I begged my father to change my number so I could be free of the harassment, but my father didn't budge. He was angry that people were calling me, but he couldn't be bothered to remember a new number if I got one, so I was stuck with what I had. After a while, the voicemail stopped. But this was at the time when my rebellious phase began, and I attended protests to keep some historical counterculture buildings in Copenhagen. Somehow he found me there. Every Thursday at the peaceful protest, he was there, staring at me. I was with friends, but I still felt threatened. His scarred arms, sometimes with new cuts, were horrifying. I didn't know what to do, so I always stayed close to my friends. I had hoped my punk phase would deter him, since I dyed my hair green, red, black, whatever, and I wore different clothes. But it seemed that it only made matters worse. He texted me sometimes during the protests, saying how I looked hot or how he liked me in legs in that skirt. Weird shit like that. I tried to glare at him, but I couldn't look at him for long. He scared me. This went on for several weeks. Then one day, he began sending me mails. I have no idea how he got hold of my email address, since I usually didn't share it with anyone. In the mails, he described how he was feeling, that he was willing to forgive me for what I've done to him, that he had watched me from afar for a while now, and he wanted to be in my life again. He described what I had been wearing that day, and even on days I hadn't been at a protest. One day he messaged me, "You look so peaceful when you sleep." I noped the fuck out at that point, told my dad everything. He was kind of upset, but he didn't yell at me too much. The following month we moved to another town a few hours away. The messages stopped for a while until one day he wrote a chilling text saying, "Why haven't I seen you in your apartment for a while? Did you move? Where are you?" I froze. He had known where I lived? I lived on the ground floor in an apartment, and my room had just been by our small garden. I was chilled to the bone thinking that maybe he actually had stood outside my window and watched me sleep. After this, I heard nothing from him. I got a boyfriend and we moved into an apartment together in a different town when we were 18. I forgot about Matt and didn't think about him anymore. One day while we were out shopping for groceries, I saw him again. He hadn't seen me, it would seem, and I ducked behind my boyfriend and told him, "Please, let's just hide. I don't want him to see me." We stayed behind him for a while, but I was extremely nervous that he would notice me. He didn't. He just bought some stuff and went out. I hoped he was just visiting someone in the area and that I wouldn't see him again. A few weeks later, I went to the town square to draw in the sun. I sat down, music in my ears, and started drawing. A few hours went by and suddenly someone sat down beside me. It was Matt, of course. I took off my headphones a little terrified, but we were in a fairly busy public place, so I didn't feel that threatened. He began talking to me as if we were old friends, telling me how he looked up to Kurt Cobain, how he had learned to play the guitar, how many girls he had fucked, shit like that. I listened and politely replied with, "Oh, uh-huh, and really?" He started complimenting me and I felt increasingly awkward. He then mentioned that I was welcome to visit him whenever I wanted. I've always been a bit curious, so I asked where he lived and he pointed at an apartment. It turned out he lived right across the fucking street from me. I made up an excuse and said I had to go. He seemed annoyed but accepted it. I went to the library and made sure to watch out for him, in case he was following me. But after a few minutes, I decided he had lost interest. I haven't heard from him since, but the fact that he suddenly lived across from me freaked me out for quite a while. So Matt, I hope we never meet again.
Number 3.
So this happened to me earlier today, and although nothing really bad became of it, I still feel the need to share this here. As a bit of a background and to set the scene, I am a 20-year-old female living in a small town in the state of Kansas. I am 5'6" and weigh in at around 170 pounds, obviously making me overweight. The area in which this took place is what the townsfolk would call the Bottoms. It's basically a long stretch of gravel road starting at one end of town, leading out and around until you reach a highway where you can choose to get on it or continue following the dirt road to who knows where. And it's called such because the area is noticeably lower and more rough in terrain than the area surrounding it. The only thing lower than it is the river that runs near our town, which residents dubbed the Core. There isn't much out there except for a few scarce houses and places for crops. Even domesticated animals such as horses and dogs are a rare sight. Most of the area is covered in farmland. However, there is one portion of it near where you head out of town that was turned into somewhat of a park area. Although the 3 acres of land is somewhat barren, aside from a set of swings and a jungle gym with a slide in one corner, a long sidewalk that circles back around on itself meant for vendors, a stone slab used for concerts, and a house city workers use as a sort of station, as well as a grassy area surrounded by a gravel road right alongside the road running through the bottoms where people can park. There are several picnic tables here and there as well, and it should be noted that you can see the river from this area, as well as the fact that the play area is blocked from the road by a large grove of trees. Aside from the events such as the 4th of July or concerts, this area is generally empty, aside from a few people here and there looking to have a good time outside. On this day, around 11 in the morning, I decided that I would take my black German Shepherd Odin there to throw a ball around after a walk. We had got there to find only one other person, an older man walking the gravel road surrounding the parking area. He was wearing headsets and didn't seem to notice us, and being the respectful dog owner I am, I kept Odin close as we headed to the play area where I could let him run and chase the ball. Mind you, Odin is generally a sweet dog who wouldn't hurt a fly, but considering that even at 15 months of age he weighs in at roughly 125 and reaches roughly 28 inches at the shoulder, he is overall built like a brick house and can appear menacing at times. As such, I didn't want to startle the man or make him uncomfortable if he didn't like dogs. But I digress. When we made it to the play area, I let him off his leash and began throwing the ball around. As fetching is the greatest thing in the world to him, he chased the ball around enthusiastically and brought it back continuously without hesitation. This went on for about 10 minutes, I myself sitting on one of the swings as I threw the ball around. It was around this time that the encounter occurred. I had thrown the ball once more, my arm starting to tire, though I didn't complain as Odin again went after the ball. It was just as he reached the ball and was about to pick it up when he suddenly stopped, and instead of picking the ball up, he looked to the trees near where we were. Just as I said before, fetch is the greatest thing in the world to Odin, and rarely does he ever get distracted when playing. He barely gave the man walking, who was still doing so now, a second glance when he passed us when we first started playing. I figured he just saw a wild critter or something, so I shrugged it off and called to him, "Odin, ball!" Instead of picking up the ball and bringing it to me as he normally did at the command, he continued to stare in the direction of the trees, a low growl emitting from him. While he was normally a well-behaved dog even off the leash, I started to worry that he'd bolt off after whatever had caught his interest. And, being the out-of-shape person I am, I knew I would be unable to actually give chase and catch him unless he decided to come back. So I stood and turned my gaze in the direction he was looking at, and froze. About 5 or so feet into the little wooded area, roughly 10 to 12 feet or so away from me, a hooded figure stood among the trees, head down and hands in their pockets. As I could not see a face or go by their body type as the hoodie seemed baggy, I could not tell whether they were male or female, though they appeared a bit taller than me. I stood there for a long moment, confused, before turning to face the person and calling out, "Hey, is everything alright? If you're scared of my dog, I can put him on his leash." As I was a little uneasy, I didn't want to give away the fact that Odin was in fact quite friendly. By the looks of it though, Odin didn't disagree. His normal reaction to new people whenever he was off the lead was to approach them and attempt to at least give them a once-over via smell before asking for attention from them, no matter who they are or where we were. Now, however, Odin stood stock still, watching the figure intently. I could also make out that the hairs on his neck were ever so slowly standing on end. The figure hadn't budged when I returned my gaze, and after repeating myself and waiting for a few moments for a response, I decided it was time for us to leave. I hastily grabbed the leash and proceeded to walk over and hook Odin up and grab the toy, only allowing myself to focus on these tasks instead of the figure as Odin refused to take his gaze off the figure. I practically had to drag Odin away, as he still seemed to refuse to take his eyes off the figure, only doing so when we had reached the gravel road encircling the parking lot, which was a good distance away. By now, the man who had been walking was coming towards us again on another lap, giving me enough courage to stop and turn to see if the figure was following us. While he was not following us like a true creep, he had moved closer to the parking area, however, still deep in the trees and still had his head down. I must have been standing there for a tad too long, or at least appeared creeped out or unnerved, as the man stopped just after passing Odin and I. There was a pause before the man asked in a slightly loud voice, assumingly so the figure at the tree line could hear, "Hey, you alright, miss?" He was obviously a bit concerned, if his expression and tone of voice was anything to go by. I replied that Odin and I had been playing the ball when we spotted the person just standing there in the trees, not responding to anything I was saying, and had moved when I walked to the gravel road. The man glanced at the figure before assuring me that he would be walking for a bit longer, and would say something to the person if they appeared to be following me. While I was not wholly scared at the thought of the person following me, as I figured, or at least hoped, Odin would protect me if the person did anything, and both Odin and I would have backup in the form of his 95-pound brother, littermate, if the person followed us on a short walk to home. I thanked him and quickly made my way back home. We got home with no further incidences, and I made sure to take a few detours on the way. But, as I said before, I live in a small town. As in, I could literally give anyone in the town either my parents' name, and most would automatically know who they are, and by default, many people knew me as well. And so I worry about this person possibly finding out where I live, and doing way worse than what they had. I might just be paranoid, and the event might seem harmless, but I'm still scared shitless by it.
Number 4. I'm a male, and when I was 19, I used to work for a company doing deliveries back in 2008. I stopped at a rest area to drop some twins off at the pool. As I'm in the stall doing my business, I noticed someone looking intently into the stall I was in, through the crack on the door, their eye pressed against the door. I make eye contact with the guy, and he slowly moves straight backwards from the stall door, revealing more of his face. I notice he has a shit-eating grin, possible pun intended, on his face. A few seconds later, someone enters the bathroom, and he washes his hands to pretend like he is finished, and exits. I'm beyond creeped out at this point. I honestly didn't even wipe. I just pulled my pants up and exited the bathroom. Once I exited the bathroom and walked a little ways, I noticed the same guy standing beside an 18-wheeler with a sleeper. I looked at him and gave him the most evil glare that I could. As I'm doing that, he motions with his hand for me to go into his truck. He does this a few times, so I proceed to tell him he's number 1 with a thoughtful finger gesture. I make it to my truck, start it up, and drive away, thinking it's all over. I had about 30 or 40 miles left to reach my place of occupation, and it's basically a straight shot from where I was to my destination, only requiring me to take an exit leading to and being on the road my work is. About 10 miles into my travel back to my place of occupation, I noticed a similar truck behind me. I kind of just shrugged it off, because of how common that type of 18-wheeler is. It was a plain white Volvo with no identifying marks, such as owner name on the truck or company name on truck or trailer. The truck stayed directly behind me no matter what lane I was in, right on my bumper. I took it as he was trying to use less gas, even though I was in just a straight stub-nosed truck. Then we hit traffic, and I was able to see inside the cabin. It was the same motherfucker from the rest stop. All I could think was, what the fuck? I think I made it clear I wanted nothing to do with him. So I take down his license plate while stopped in traffic, and I do the smartest thing I can think of. I go to the nearest police station and report it. It turned out the plates were reported stolen about a day before from a personal rig of the same make. I never heard anything more though. Number 5.
So I live on a not-so-quiet neighborhood, which is filled with derelicts such as methamphetamine users and undomesticated alcohol tasters. And this is an issue, but I have lived here most of my life, so I'm not fazed as to walk late at night, which I'm required to do because of my working conditions, cleaner at a local mall without a car. I'm walking back from the mall after finishing up work, and everything has been fine for the most part today. I got to even take some nearing expiration date food back with me, and nobody has been hassling me today. As I get to the corner of my street and pass by a house, which seemed abandoned for the longest time, I notice a lot of lights inside and out, and they're lit up, and that queerly moving shadows are flicking back and forth behind the curtains of the house front. I say queerly because the movement seems so determined and mechanical that it could only belong to some sort of automated machine. But I watched it for so long that I got the impression that it seemed more like a larger set person pacing back and forth. So as stupid as I am, I decided to go and check out whatever the fuck was going on inside. I remember getting to the window and feeling so sure that I was spotted out as the pacing shadow had suddenly stopped. I could make out quite visibly that a face was peeking out of the curtains, but it turned out to be quite coincidental, as a truck had just drove up to the roadside of the house. Just my luck. A beefy set man sauntered out of the truck and into the house, mumbling something like, "He's double grounded. He is definitely double grounded." I didn't think much of it at the time as I was so panicked that I could have been caught, but it does make sense later. I decided that I had enough excitement for one day and I headed back home. The next day I believe I was in my usual routine of waking up, watching, reading my usual book, show, in bed, and I had noticed some weird almost white noise of crunching and creaking outside. I remember that I brushed it off as wind affected my house with creaks, and a lot of crunching could have been because of the rotting wooden balcony outside. Out of nowhere, I suddenly hear a bellowing voice shouting, "Nicholas, get home, or you're going to be double, triple grounded." And after this, I remember feeling a good sense of dread and fight or flight because the peculiar white noise had suddenly stopped, and I heard a lumbering, shuffling mix with anguishing exhalations from directly on the other side of the wall, which my bed is pushed next to. I slowly crept into my own kitchen, making sure not to be visible through the windows of my house, and then I grabbed my bulky security torch to use as a blunt force weapon if need be, and a kitchen knife. I sneaked towards my back door, which leads directly to the wall on the other side of my bedroom, psyched myself up with anger. After a long time of psyching myself up, I bust through the back door and ran to the outside wall of my bedroom. I didn't find anybody, but what I did find was perhaps even more disturbing. A dozen so emptied potato chip bags, and a KFC meal variety bucket, almost devoid of content aside from what looked to be chicken wing bones. I don't know what to make of this besides somebody was watching me through my window all night, whilst enjoying a meal. Now this would lead me to ask, how has this happened before? Is this frequent? If whoever left this was keen enough to bring a full meal, does this mean that it is indeed a frequent? I am not sure as to what to do, and I'm a little distraught to be honest.
Number 6. Where I live, winter is a living hell. I have to shovel every other week, and what's worse, I live on a corner. Anyway, I pop in my earbuds and get to work. I'm about halfway done when I see this guy walking in the middle of the street. I'm kind of creeped out, but I brush it off. I decide to make a mental note to keep an eye on him because I was getting some bad vibes. I keep shoveling, but as he's walking past me, I hear him yell something to me. I take an earbud out and ask him if he was talking to me. Yeah. Do you, have a phone on you? I need to make a call. He replies. I was already sketched out. We don't live in the best neighborhood, and this was a common tactic thieves used to get phones. Yeah, 1 sec, I say, as I pretend to look for my phone. Sorry, man, I must have left my cell at home, I say, trying to act as if I would have given it to him in the first place. Say, you don't live in that house, do you? He says as he points behind me. This caught me off guard, but I was able to make up some bullshit about how I was getting paid to shovel their sidewalk. You know what, though? I think the bar down the street has a phone you could use, I offer, hoping that he would go away. Oh, thanks, he says as he starts walking down the street. Relieved that he's finally gone, I get back to shoveling, but when I stop to catch my breath, I see a person duck their head back into an alleyway, but I get back to the task at hand. When I look up again, the same guy is standing a bit farther down the street by the bar. As I finish shoveling, every once in a while, I look up to see if he's there, and every time, he's a little bit closer. Once I'm done, I loop around the block and go in the back door. I looked out the window to see if he was still there, but thankfully, he wasn't. Number 7.
Something you should know about me is that I'm a butcher, and have been for just over 3 years now. Each person in the meat room has their own set of knives that they maintain. This includes cleaning, sharpening, and other general maintenance. I keep mine in particular good order. Not sure if it's OCD or something, but I enjoy my knives extremely sharp and spotless. I like to take my knives home every night so that other people don't use them or mix them up. I live very close to work and usually take a walking trail by the forest to work in the day, and then bus back home at night once I'm off. Anyways, about a week ago, I had agreed to stay in a little late to do some extra cleaning. This caused me to miss my bus home. I stood outside my store weighing my options. I could either wait another 25 plus minutes for a bus, or I could take the path home. I decided the walk home would be quicker and set off. As I began my walk, a large man with a beard turned the corner from behind the store and began walking behind me. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and although the store is close to a sketchy neighborhood, you never hear about much crime in my area. So as he followed me up the sidewalk and eventually onto the path, I stupidly didn't pay much attention. I walked about half the path's length when I heard his brisk walk break into a jog. He came up beside me and shouted, "Hey, buddy." I turned to greet the man. He was even worse looking up close. He had a comb-over and a long, unkept beard. He stopped in front of me and asked where I was going. I told him I was on my way home and asked if there was something I could help him with. "You got any money?" he asked. I could smell alcohol on his breath as he spoke. Not wanting to cause any trouble, I simply replied with, "No, sorry, man. I don't have anything on me." And then I began to walk off. He placed his hand on my shoulder as I tried to walk past him, pushing me back in place. Clumsily pulled out a pocket knife. "I know you got a phone or something," he said, threatening me. I nearly shat myself. I wanted to run, but I was too scared of running past him, and the thought of running the other way and being farther away from home scared me even more. "Just a sec," I stammered, thinking on my feet. "I've got my wallet in my backpack." He muttered something like, "Give it here," as I frantically took off my backpack and unzipped it, pretending not to hear him. He stepped forward angrily and snatched it out of my hands, but not before I got my hands on my work knives. He must not have noticed me pulling them out, because he immediately started rifling through my backpack. I took my knives out of their holder and tried to think of something badass and threatening to say. All that came out as I poised myself menacingly was, "Hey, asshole!" He looked up and I saw his face drop as he stared at my perfectly sharpened, 14-inch butcher knives. He stared at me for what felt like hours, sizing me up. My adrenaline had pumped up. I eventually decided to make a move. I began to step forward, raising my arm, when the guy ran past me with my backpack in hand. Luckily, I never had my wallet in my backpack, and I was wearing my work uniform, so all he got from me was an old Batman backpack. I told the police when I got home, and even asked around work about him. No one had really seen him before, nor did he come wandering around my store again. In retrospect, I probably should have went with something like, "You should never try to rob a butcher," or something, but either way, I'm very fortunate the man was likely drunk instead of homicidal.
Number 8. I was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, so I know the surrounding areas of Waikiki and Kapahulu like the back of my hand. This happened a year or two ago. I'm a female, and I was 18, having just finished a nice dinner date, followed by a walk on the beach at night. By the time my boyfriend and I decided to part, it was about 2 a.m. It is a straight shot to my house. I walk past the Shell Center and the Honolulu Zoo, and just keep going up to Diamond Head. This is about a 10-minute walk, as I walk rather briskly when alone, so I decide to pass on taking a taxi. I'm wearing a strapless dress with flats, one earphone in my ear, and I make my way home. It is not unusual for cars to slow down, catcall, or even offer a ride home. However, this night was different. A car slowed down as I was walking past the last ABC store across the street from the zoo, and I crossed the street, making note of the car. I only saw half his face, but I could tell he was watching me. He then sped off. This is where it gets a little creepy. The road slightly turns, and you have to walk past the zoo length without any lights, and I decided to walk on the side of the street with trees, since there's a lot of homeless people on the other side, where the parking lot is. I begin to worry, for the first time ever, wondering if I should have walked the long way home or not, when I saw the car parked on my side of the street just a little further ahead. I did not have my knife or taser with me at the time, and although I was roughly 5'1", I knew how to handle myself. I take out both of my earphones, readying myself to seem confident. The guy who had slowed down in the car earlier steps out from behind one of the trees, only a few paces ahead of me, and holds his hands up as if to say, "Don't worry." Hell no. I couldn't help but scream, because what I hadn't seen before was now obvious. He had an eye patch on, with a long scar on the right side of his face. Big, fat, fucking nope. "You remind me of my little sister," he says, trying to calm me down. "And I'd just like to give you a ride home." He takes a step towards me. 2 seconds later, I find myself screaming and sprinting across the street, back towards Waikiki, where I could find a cab. Every time I looked back until I couldn't see him, he was just standing there, staring with a grin on his face. Let's not meet again, pirate butt fuck.